the head of cardiology walked in and he started crying. He had never seen anything like this. He said, I don't know what to make of this. We think we've done everything that was within reason. I don't know how else to say this other than it seems like a miracle to me.
Welcome to The Meaning Mindset with Rabbi Ron Lippaz. It's season 3, and we are grateful for the generous support of Dr. Jack and Beth Lynn. Professor Victor Strecher is a behavioral scientist at the University of Michigan. He is one of the most compelling voices that I've ever encountered on the connection between purpose and human well-being. His research and the life experience that sharpened it makes a case that purpose isn't a luxury of the comfortable. It's, in fact, a biological imperative. There's a conversation about what it means to live on purpose, not just as a slogan, but as a practice grounded in science, in loss, in grief, in the kind of hard-won clarity that one only gets through the challenges of our lives. Professor Vic Strecher, welcome. Vic, it's really a gift to have you here. I've been really inspired and fascinated by you since I heard you interviewed by Shankar Vedanta on Hidden Brain. And it made such an impression on me. I started summarizing the episode to various people and sharing the episode with various people because I had this urgent sense that people need to hear the story. I want to ask you to indulge me and therefore to benefit the audience by telling us the central narrative of your book, which I'll just hold up again, and that's Life on Purpose, and a book that's really had an impact further from your story, but really I've learned a lot from both. If you're willing, I want to ask you to tell from the beginning Julia's story.
Very happy to, Ron. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be on as well. Very grateful for that.
My pleasure.
So our daughter Julia was born in 1990, and she was born healthy, as she liked to say. She was a 10 out of 10, which she was. And then we went on sabbatical to the Netherlands when she was 6 months old. And I was going to do research there for 6 months. And she caught a chickenpox virus, apparently, when she was there. And, we usually just get a fever and a rash for a day or two, usually, right, and it goes away. And unfortunately, the chickenpox virus attacked her heart, which happens very rarely, but does happen, and it destroyed her heart. And, she started losing weight, and we were in the hospital in the Netherlands, wondering why she was losing weight. The doctors were wondering, and finally a cardiologist just happened to walk by and noticed that she seemed to need some sort of, heart issue, or had some type of heart issue, pulled over, and everything is, of course, in Dutch, and we weren't understanding Dutch. So he pulls an echocardiograph machine, and starts looking at her heart through an echo, and gets this concerned look on his face, calls a resident, and they take us in, my wife and I, into a room, and the resident starts crying. And I knew something was going on. And the doctor just very matter-of-factly said, your daughter's going to die. And she has a heart that's completely destroyed. And she has about a month to live. And, just suddenly, you're thinking maybe she has some GI problem, with her stomach or an esophagus or something, she's losing weight, but it wasn't that. And I remember just kind of instantly just going, is there anything that can be done? No. And you should really just go home tomorrow, go back home to the US and let her die in peace at home. Wow. And I remember then through my tears, I said, isn't there anything that could be done, like a heart transplant or something? And he said, no, those don't work. And we don't do those on children anyway. Just go home, just let her die. And literally, we just took her out of the hospital that night, and which is a strange thing, because usually you leave the hospital with some sense of, that you're better They don't
Right.
let you out unless you're better or unless you're dead. And here she was really, really sick and she wasn't any better. And we did take the next flight home the next day and brought her back to where I was teaching at the University of North Carolina. It turns out, I mean, and they were waiting because luckily I was working there. I knew a lot of people and they were prepared for her and they started doing tests. And they basically said, actually, her other organs are fine. And her heart is ruined, that's for sure. But we have a new transplant surgeon from Stanford who does pediatric transplants, and we haven't done one in the southeastern part of the U.S. yet. And we're waiting. A child was waiting and died before she got a heart. And she became the first child in the southeastern part of the United States to get a heart transplant. So we were really on the cutting edge. There were just a handful of kids who had gotten heart transplants in the US by that time. There was some data on them. We knew that about 25% of kids, even waiting for 50% of kids, I'm sorry, 50% of kids waiting for a new heart died before they got one. And then if they did get a new heart, their chance of surviving 5 years was 50%. So you can do the math yourself. It was 50% times 50%, which is 25%. So her chance of living to be 6 years old was 1 in 4. So we had to decide, first of all, what kind of life should we give her? Initially we even had to decide whether to list her for a heart transplant. Should we just let her die in peace? And some of our friends suggested maybe we consider doing that. But it's pretty hard. I would, imagine if you have that chance, just saying, no, let's let our daughter die.
Right.
We just couldn't do that. And so we did list her, but I started looking at the kind of life she would lead and the chance she might die. And the chance that she would die was very high. And we also knew that she was going to be compromised in some ways. So we had to ask ourselves, what is a good life? What is a life worth living? And how should we deal with this life relative to our lives? And after she got a heart transplant, we decided, in a way, to live all of our lives in a new way, as if every day we might die. And that idea of death salience, that's what it's called, death or mortality salience in psychology, it turns out to be conducive to finding a stronger purpose in your life. And that makes sense. Marcus
Sure.
Aurelius, 2,000 years ago said, don't live your life as if you're going to live 10,000 years. While you're alive, do good things. And it makes sense even from an econometric way. Like, let's say you had $10,000 and somebody on the street is asking you for money. It's much easier to give that person $5, $10 than if you have $20 or $5, right? So as soon as you place a finiteness to your life, I believe you start living it in a more vibrant way. And that's exactly what happened to us, Ron. We started living life as if we weren't just practicing. It wasn't like a practice life. It was a real life. It was really defined. There is an end, whistle at the end of the game. And we sure better live it to the fullest extent.
Vic, can I ask you, first of all, when you say we, that's you, your wife, and your older daughter. And
Our
then
older daughter, Rachel. Yeah.
And then my question is, how do you sustain that? Because it's one thing to have an intention, but as we all know, it's difficult to make that sustainable. How did you make that enduring?
It's a great question. As I started thinking about how to live a bigger and more purposeful life, I started thinking about the concept of energy and vitality. And I met a person who is really very, very good at this. And he's been a coach to many people. His name is Jim Loehr, Loehr, and he's been a coach to Martina Navratilova and Maria Sharapova and, many, many tennis stars and golf stars and Olympiads, Olympians, many people. And he talks a lot about purpose, but he also talks about energy for purpose. So I started being a researcher looking at what gives you more energy. And I found over a lot of research that there were five basic things. There are other things as well, but five basic things that give you a lot of energy. One is sleep. One is presence or mindfulness. One is activity, physical activity. One is being creative.
Yeah.
And one is eating well. And so I created this moniker of space: sleep, presence, activity, creativity, and eating well. And considering all five of those things every day, becoming a researcher of my life, what gives me more energy to be purposeful? We can all have a purpose, but being purposeful means you're engaged in that purpose. Just like you said, Ron, such a great question. Like, how do you become purposeful? And you need that energy. So you need to start thinking about, as a researcher of yourself, does sleep give me more energy? Does being present? If so, what kind of presence? Should I meditate? Should I do yoga, which is a meditation? Many other forms of being present. How do I become more physically active? How do I become creative? What are the things that I do? Should I go to a museum? That could become creative, because how you interpret things. It could be just innovating something, creating some new things. Could be painting or drawing, many things. And then how do I eat well in a way that gives me more energy? And so I started doing that myself. And it was very helpful, and it allowed me to become more purposeful.
And I know I read about this in the book, all that combination, the recipe in a sense that you offer.
Yeah.
Did you arrive at this? And I know we're going to go back to Julia's story, but did you arrive at that need for that research while she was young in her life at this point, or did that come later in retrospect?
Yeah, it came later. I think while she was young and had a new heart, we decided to really give her a big life, give her many experiences. And that was one of my purposes. And my purpose, a big purpose in my life, was to help her have a big, meaningful life, as well as our other daughter, Rachel. But I wasn't thinking as much about energy at that time, but I was younger too, and I did have a lot of energy.
Yeah.
As I was starting to get older, and I started to run out of energy a little bit, and I couldn't quite do as many things as I felt I needed to. So I started thinking more about energy while she was still alive. And then 15 years ago, she passed away very suddenly. And it was unexpected. She was in nursing school at the University of Michigan. She had needed a second heart transplant, actually, when she was 9, and gone through a very difficult time during that period. When she died, I kind of went through my own deep grieving process, and I found myself, well, maybe I'll go back a second, Ron. When she died, one of my biggest concerns was that I might end up breaking up with Jerry, my wife.
Yeah.
Because I had read somewhere that 80% of marriages break up with the loss of a child. So we went to a grieving counselor and a therapist, and she was also a marriage counselor, which is great. And I remember coming in as if I'm some real smarty pants and said, well, I've heard that 80% of, marriages break up. And she kind of smiled gently and said, well, 50% of marriages break up anyway. I thought, oh, you're right. If you're familiar with Bayesian statistics, that would be called a prior. That's a prior stat that I had forgotten all about. So anyway, she was right. But then she followed that with, but I can tell you one thing. If you start judging how the other person is grieving, you say you're grieving too fast, or you're grieving, too much or too little, or you're not, it's gone on too long, whatever, you'll break up if you start judging how the person is grieving. So you have to go through your own journey. You'll have to support each other, but you have to go through your own journey. And so my wife, who's an artist, went through her journey by sculpting, by gardening, doing things that gave her meaning. And I went up to northern Michigan to a cabin that we have right on Lake Michigan, right on the beach of Lake Michigan, and basically started eating and drinking myself to death. And I continued just to like not care about anything.
This is it right in the aftermath of Julia's death. I'm sorry to interrupt.
It was about yeah, within the first couple weeks after she passed away, I went up north, and then I'd stayed up there and didn't see anybody, didn't want to see anybody. Stayed up there almost by myself for about a month. And I was just watching TV all the time, watching nothing. You know, I found myself watching what Kim Kardashian was on, which is, to me, a sure sign you're ready to die.
Yeah.
And I mean, and no offense to Kim Kardashian, I guess I just did offend her, but no offense in the sense I don't know who she is, but why should I care about her in some big way? I care about the things that I care about and should care about the things I care about, but I wasn't caring about anything. So I woke up one morning after a big dream that I had had with Julia in it, and found myself about 2 miles out on a kayak on Lake Michigan at 5:15 in the morning. And I was paddling really hard, and I was considering paddling to Wisconsin, which is 87 miles.
And sorry, just to clarify for me, you meant not in the dream, but in reality that morning.
In reality,
Yeah.
I woke up from a dream, and I found myself in this kayak about 2 miles out. And it was still really cold. The water was probably about 50 degrees or so. I would have died had I fallen in. I just woke up, jumped into the kayak, was still in my boxers and t-shirt, which is too much information. It's just that I didn't put on a life preserver or anything. Sure. I just went out, and the water was perfectly smooth. And I thought, it's so smooth. Let's just, just going to go to Wisconsin as far as I can, which of course I never would have made. And the sun came up at that point in time, around 5:30, and all of a sudden everything around me started sparkling, as it would, just everything just started glowing around me. And it was so bright as the sun came up. And I really have a hard time explaining what this is, what this feeling was, but I knew that my daughter Julia was in me. And my daughter was telling me, you have to get over this, Vic. And it wasn't like you have to get over this. It was like, you have to get over your own ego. You have to get over yourself. And you do have a choice, though. If you don't, you can continue on and you can die. And it's almost like my daughter made this very clear to me. You have a choice here. You can continue if you want. And there's almost something freeing in having a choice. Yeah. Like, I can make the decision. I'm not being somehow determined to go, end my life or to not. You have a choice right now. There's a crossroads that says life and death right out there, 2 miles out in Lake Michigan, very deep and very cold. And of course, I wouldn't be talking to you if I had continued on. I turned around and I pulled a sheet of paper out just instinctively and just said, write down the things that matter most in your life. Just write down as fast as you can, just free form, write the things that matter. And I wrote down my wife, Jerry, and our daughter, Rachel. I wrote down my parents. I wrote down my research matters a lot. My friends matter. I wrote down my students, and I stopped for a second and I circled my students and then thought, wow, my students really matter. And they're all Julia's age. They're all about 19 or 20, and which is when Julia passed away. I decided to call the university and that morning and said, I know you gave me all this time off from teaching this semester, even next semester, but it's not the advice I need. I need to actually go back, and I need to teach my students as if they're my own daughter, which really fundamentally changed my life. This is when I started realizing, geez, Vic, you've got over 200 students. which now has since grown a lot. But what are you going to do how are you going to do that? You're getting older, and how are you going to maintain the energy to teach these students, everyone as if they're your daughter? So that's when I started coming up with this idea of space. I better sleep better, be more present, active, creative, and eat better.
I want to take you back to something you said a moment ago about Julia being within you. How do you describe that? How do you clarify that? Because obviously it's an enigma in itself.
Yeah. I felt, well, first of all, I felt like I was glowing. I don't know how else to put it. When the sun came up, everything was glittering around me, and I felt suddenly that I was glowing. I don't know if this glow was inside me. I just cannot explain it. And I've never told anybody this, Ron, but I felt like I was somehow lit up in a way. And I felt her, and it wasn't like in English, it wasn't in any language. It was just this strong feeling that I had that she was telling me this.
You said that she said to you, Dad, you have a choice. Essentially, you can choose life or death. And that was very real as you're out in a kayak on the water. And literally one direction is in one direction. The other is, one is toward death, one is toward inevitable life, let's say. There was another part which presumably you were always also referencing in your mind, which is I can continue eating and drinking to death, or I can turn back to a better life. What was that part of that decision?
Well, I knew that I was really having a hard time. And people had sent me books. People sent me Viktor Frankl's book, in fact, Man's Search for Meaning. And I just had it, I hadn't really opened it. I hadn't looked at it. I read it a long time ago, I think in high school, because we were supposed to.
Right.
And I read it pretty quick. Okay, that's fine. Concentration camps,
right. Logotherapy.
Tough time. Yeah, logotherapy. But it didn't hit me. And reading it just a few weeks before this episode out on the lake was meaningful, but it didn't put me over the edge on what I needed to do. This idea of being out 2 miles out and being at that crossroads and having the agency to be able to decide was really important for me. Before then, I felt like I was in no control of my life. Even after reading Frankl's fabulous book, amazing book, it didn't turn me that much. I was just, I would read a little bit and then set it down. Okay, someone's trying to help me. Somebody sent me the poetry of Rumi, which is beautiful. It was nice. But it took some sort of, it took this very vivid dream that I had the next, the morning of this kayak adventure. And then the kayak experience, it actually took that experience, and then it required me coming back, writing things down. And I didn't even know I was writing them down, other than just saying, write stuff that matters most to you. And then I just circled something that I thought I could do something about. I could still teach, and I could teach these students as if they're my child. And that might be healing for me. And it turned out to be phenomenally healing. But that type of agency and choice is really important in my own life. My wife will tell you I am a very independently minded person. I rarely listen to other people telling me what to do. And self-help books usually turn me off rather than turn me on, quite honestly. And so I kind of had to go through this whole experience myself. So Viktor Frankl's book, amazing. But all these things, I think, did actually contribute. Man's Search for Meaning contributed to this epiphany that I had and what I was going to do about it. I hope that's kind of making sense.
It is.
I'm trying to actually make sense of it as I'm talking to you, Ron.
So I'm doing the same, listening to what you're saying. And I'm reminded of, I think it was the first episode of the podcast, which was with Viktor Frankl's grandson, who runs the Frankel Institute in Vienna. Yeah. And I said to him, I said something like, So I think what your grandfather was saying is we can ascribe meaning to, and he'd stop me. He said, no, he didn't say ascribe meaning. The meaning is there. It's not ascribing meaning to anything. It's recognizing the inherent meaning. And I think in some ways you're telling me the same thing from your own experience. It's not that we do a workaround in our brain to give those moments of intensity, of life, of pain, of loss, meaning. It's because that would be an add-on. That would be somehow functional. But instead it's saying it's inherently meaningful. That moment on the boat was inherently meaningful.
My students were inherently meaningful. I
Yeah.
didn't need to say suddenly, oh, I'm going to add them in. It's like they were always there. I just needed to uncover that and unlock, and then understand it. It wasn't a matter of ascribing. You're so right. That's great wisdom. Thank you. And yeah, the moment on the lake was of course the most meaningful moment of my life. It's interesting. If I can riff a second, I just
Yeah, of
had
course.
a student 2 weeks ago email me out of the blue because he had not taken my classes or knew anything about me, but he had decided, and he's, I think, a finance student at the University of Michigan. He's a senior. He wrote me a long email about how he decided to put a booth up at the Diag at the University of Michigan, which is kind of our main part where everybody walks by.
Oh,
It's
the
right in front
quad.
of the main
Okay.
library.
Yeah.
It's called the quad, yeah, or the Diag. And so he put a booth up and it had a sign, tell me the most meaningful moment of your life.
Mm.
And he also had a box of donuts there. So if you came up and told the most meaningful moments of your life, you could get a donut. One thing, I think the most important part is that most people didn't take a donut.
Really?
They actually felt the need to do this. And he picked up 100 most meaningful moments right away. He
Wow.
had no trouble getting students to do this. And he said, one of the students said, you should contact this Dr. Strecher guy because he really thinks about this a lot. So I decided to contact. I learned more about you and I thought, oh, I better talk to him. And when you get a message like that, and I get a lot of messages from people all the time, and I just don't have time to do everything. But you don't turn down something like this. I said, let's have some coffee.
Yeah.
And it turns out he typed out all of the stories from these people. And we put them into ChatGPT. And because, you know, AI, large language models, are really good at dissecting patterns in language. And oh my gosh, everything related to greater purpose.
Wow.
That, whether it was through tragedy, whether it was through caring for a mother, whether it was through volunteering and learning something about them, whether it was falling in love, all of these things opened the door. They were the most meaningful moments. And then it opened the door to purpose in their lives because these people all continued to talk in a purposeful way. So yeah, sorry to riff on that, but I just thought of that as we were talking about this most meaningful moment, and it really did create purpose.
I want to ask you to go back to Julia's second heart transplant and its
Yeah, yeah,
success and its failure.
yeah, yeah. It was a difficult time because she was 9 years old, and so she was in elementary school. She was on a softball team, and I was the coach of the softball
Mm.
team. She was the worst player by far. She got one hit the whole season, and when she did, I started crying. I just couldn't help it. Oh my God, you got it. That's great. And it was one of those little infield hits that everyone, created errors from. But it was fine. And as we were walking back from the game, she fainted. She passed out, and I knew something was wrong. So we, brought her into Children's Hospital to cardiology. She knew them very well. They're amazing people. And they put her right into moderate care. There's intensive care, moderate care, and, regular care in hospitals. And so they put her in moderate, and they said, yeah, it looks like she may need a new heart, but it's not urgent. And, there are a couple of other people in line, and that was fine with us. We were willing to do that. And, but it did turn out that she really needed a new heart faster than that. And you know, they did the whole workup perfectly. It's just you can't predict these things perfectly.
Mm.
And she started getting sicker, and they, I think they elevated her on the list more, but you know, certainly there are a lot of kids who were waiting
Yeah.
ahead of her. And then one night I was staying with her at the hospital, and there was a room that was available right next to her, which is nice. And they said, you know, Vic, you don't have to sit in a chair and sleep. You can use this bed if you want. I said, great. And so while I was there, it was during the US Open tennis tournament. And I'm a big tennis fan. And I was watching these two tennis players, Todd Martin playing another guy. And Todd Martin, I think it was the finals, as I recall. And he was losing 2-0.
Mm.
And he was so tired. And he started coming back. But he was so tired and it was so hot, he was barfing on the side of the court. He was throwing
Wow.
up. He was so tired and so sick, and yet he kept going. And he ended up winning this tournament. And I thought to myself, it was about 1 a.m. or so, as I recall, I just said, if Todd Martin could win that, maybe Julia could survive this.
Mm.
And, you know, that's, to me, that's what sports do for me. They show resilience. And Todd Martin demonstrated resilience to me. Anyway, that night around 4 a.m, I was woken up and by a nurse who had tears in her eyes, and she said, "I'm afraid over the last couple of hours, Julia's had 3 heart attacks, 2 or 3. I can't remember exactly, and it's not looking good for her." So I called my wife. She came in, and then it turns out by the time my wife came in and we could see her, she had had 6 heart attacks in a
At
row.
age 9.
And at 9. And she was laying there and she had the burn marks of the paddles when they kept shocking her. And she was completely out of it. In fact, her eyes were wide open and her pupils were fixed and dilated. They weren't dilating to light at all. She looked dead. She looked very brain dead to us. And they had been testing her, and she didn't respond to any tests of brain function. She didn't respond to what's called a Lubinsky test, where they take a sharp scalpel and they scrape it along the bottom of her foot, which is excruciating. She didn't do anything.
Mm.
And there was no sign that she was, you know, doing anything. And in fact, my wife looked at her and just said, "She's not there." And I said, "I have to agree. She's just not there." And she totally unresponsive. And so they said, "We can pull her breathing tube." She had a respirator, if you'd like, or we can wait if you like. And my wife just said, "Do you think that we could donate her organs to other people?" They said, "Well, yes, some of her organs actually are viable, and that's a nice thing for you to do." I hadn't been thinking that way, but my wife was thinking in this incredibly transcending way. And they said, "But it's going to take a while because we'll need to bring a harvest team in." They called this a harvest team because they
Yeah.
literally harvest the organs from, you know, our daughter's body. So we said goodbye to Julia at that point. Put a do not resuscitate sign on because I didn't want her suffering anymore. We didn't. And we were hoping the harvest team might be able to help other children, but it was going to take some hours. So we went to this park that's right next to the hospital called the Arboretum. It's a place students go all the time, but it's, you know, still really early in the morning. And we went out and our daughter was there and my wife and I, and we just hugged each other. And I said, "You know, we've been a quartet, but now we're going to be a trio, but we're still going to make good music." And we came back and, you know, I was determined to still keep our family together. I was determined to keep you know, to not let this destroy me or destroy our family.
Mm.
But we came back and fully expecting that she would have been dead by then. And she seemed to be, and we hadn't seen her. And doctor said, you might want to take a look at Julia, just, if you want to say goodbye to her or just, see how she's doing. They pulled back the curtain and she was actually kind of moving a little spastically.
Mm.
Her eyes were still fixed and wide open, but she was moving very spastically. And I didn't know what to make of that, so I asked one of the doctors, and the doctors kind of said, this is often what happens in the last throes of death. If your heart really is giving up or other things, that sort of movement happens. And I said, okay. And I just sat down next to her and whispered goodbyes. And I held her hand, and I thought I felt a little squeeze. And of course, doctors often say, parents do that. They feel the squeeze, whether it's there or not. And I then whispered in her ear, if you can hear me, Julia, squeeze my hand. And I felt a little squeeze. It was just very, very faint, though. And I then told the doctor, I think I felt a squeeze. And the doctor said, oh, okay. And I started doing some calculus in my own head, realizing that if she actually could come back, if they resuscitated her, but she was mentally severely impaired, and, she could just squeeze my hand after I asked her to squeeze it, but still be impaired, she would never get a new heart. She wouldn't be listed. And so I didn't want her suffering anymore. So I had to figure out some test. And the night before we were actually together, before I started watching the US Open, I was teaching her Roman numerals, which is something that she was learning in school. And we'd gone through the first set of Roman numerals. And so I whispered in her ear. And again, you're whispering into a child who has her eyes totally fixed and dilated and wide open and just staring. And she's just making, every once in a while, a tiny little jerk like that. Said, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand IV times in Roman numerals. And she squeezed my hand 4 times. And then I went, holy crap. I turned to the doctor and said, you listen to this. You hold her hand. And went through the same procedure. And he went pale. Wow. And suddenly there were like 8 people working on her. And they had already pulled out all of her tubes except for her breathing tube. They put all those tubes back in. And they started working on her like crazy. And she came back. No one knows why. It's the doctors there have treated hundreds, thousands of patients, never seen anything like it, and not even close. So I didn't know what even to make of it. And within, excuse me, within a few days, she got a new heart. She was listed to become number 1. She was number 1 in the nation for a new heart after that. And she became a new heart transplant recipient. And then and she was still blind during that, partially blind. And that started coming back because the part of her brain that was not getting oxygen was part of, related to optic nerve. And so the bottom line is she ended up seeing again. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Within a week, we had a piano. Sorry.
It's okay.
Within a week, we put an electric piano at her bed, and she could see, and she had been playing the piano, but she started playing better than she had ever played. And she was playing Bach on the piano, this beautiful piece. And the doctor, the head of cardiology, walked in and he started crying. He had never seen anything like this and said, I don't know what to make of this. We think we've done everything that was within reason. And I don't know how else to say this other than it seems like a miracle to me.
I think I remember a title, certainly remember the contents, a title of a chapter in your book, which is Miracles, God and the Afterlife, or God, Miracles in the Afterlife. What do
Yeah,
you make of it? Your daughter had essentially, let's say, three afterlives. One was after the
yeah,
first transplant, and then the second,
right.
and then the ultimate one. What's your sense of it now? You've, as you said in the book, read at least 30 books at the time to date. That was years
Yeah.
ago on these issues. Where do you sit now?
So I started thinking more about miracles, and I read, a book by C.S. Lewis about miracles. I read a book by Graham Greene called The Potting Shed related to miracles. Um, and that was great. And I started really believing that there may be some bigger, deeper cosmic purpose for Julia, and that she was going to grow and become something amazingly special for people. And when she died, um, I started questioning that. I thought, wow, okay, the miracle stuff just went poof.
Mhm.
Maybe no one was really taking care of her. Maybe this is just all, physiological and a lot of luck. A lot of luck, by the way, an unbelievable, indescribable amount of luck when you look at the odds of her surviving six straight heart attacks, um, going through two heart transplants. All of those things defy odds, and so the chances that she was still alive, by the time she was 19, is really way off the charts. It's lottery
Mm.
or beyond lottery. Um, but when she died, I started wondering about this, and I have now come to the realization and idea that Julia truly does live through me. That my purpose, in part, is to convey the love that Julia brought to many people and the care that she brought to people. Because she really did. And she's a very, very special kid. And I think in living the life I am right now, I'm in some way, hopefully, helping her stay alive.
Yeah. There's something that really struck me in the book that I want to talk to you about because I just don't know the answers. I think you might be closer to them. One thing is, toward the end of your book, you talk about sailing through storms in our lives. And
Yeah.
one example that you give, essentially, one of the conclusions I think that you're drawing is that people who have a connection to their purpose, a definition, a clarity of purpose, seem to have better outcomes. You use the examples of the Fukushima reactor, the earthquakes, people in two different groups, essentially those who had a strong sense of purpose and those who didn't. And a few of the outcomes that were interesting were resilience by comparison, and particularly post-traumatic stress disorder versus post-traumatic growth. Do you want to elucidate a little? And then I want to ask you one further question.
Very much, because I think the father of that research is none other than Viktor Frankl,
Hmm.
who, in going through 4 concentration camps, losing his family, much of his family in the camps, um, uh, managed to come out and help millions and millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, uh, with their lives and look at their lives in new ways and develop post-traumatic growth as a result of difficult times rather than post-traumatic stress. So I view Viktor Frankl as the father of this type of research through his logotherapy work and own personal experiences. But now we know that people who have a strong transcending purpose, and by transcending purpose, I mean purposes that are bigger than ourselves, and not purposes such as I want my purpose is to be the most attractive person, the richest person, the, most popular person, those things. Those are purposes, but they're not the type of transcending purpose that actually seems to help you physically. So we know that people with transcending purposes tend to have more antiviral cells produced in their body. They have fewer pro-inflammatory cells produced. We know that people with a strong transcending purpose, now we recently published a study showing that their epigenetic clocks are longer. Our epigenetic clocks are our biological clocks that actually determine in some part how our DNA expresses different proteins. And we can get into that if you want, but the short and long of that is that it's a really nice biological clock of what's going on in you. And people with strong purpose have longer clocks.
One question I've had difficulty answering in my life, and it's probably a scientific answer, and you may have it. When we look at people who endure enormous strain and stress, and I think of two categories. One is Holocaust survivors, obviously front and center in my mind. Second to that, equally, are past presidents of this country. Everything says to me that they shouldn't survive, right? These are people who, after that level of unimaginable stress like nobody else has, those Holocaust survivors, what they endured, and presidents, what they go through in the course of 4 or 8 years, and presumably life should be shortened by a lot. And it doesn't seem to be. How do you understand that?
Yeah, well, I'll start with presidents.
Okay.
And my favorite president is Jimmy Carter. Maybe not the best president, but the best after president, right?
Right.
Post-president, I think, of any that I can think of, because he started, so many movements and continued to volunteer building homes for, the rest of his life. He, imagine how trying it is to be a president. Well, you just brought it up. It is, no matter which president you are. And yet he continued to not just survive, but thrive. And I think it's because of this transcending purpose that he had. There are other presidents who say, I can't wait to go back and start golfing again.
Right.
But, those people after a few days realize they stink at golf. And maybe golf is not going to keep them going. And in fact, sometimes the bigger you are, CEOs who I've worked with before who then retire, suddenly they're not needed anymore. Nobody relies on them anymore. They don't have a purpose. They've lost that purpose. They have to repurpose their lives. And they're not going to repurpose their life through golf or through drinking Mai Tais on the beach in Hawaii. Those are wonderful things, and they may build up more energy to become purposeful. But if you don't have this deeper transcending purpose in your life at retirement, you're going to have a hard time. You could say the same thing. We have studied soldiers that have come back from the Gulf War, and some of them suffer PTSD, but others end up with post-traumatic growth. And in studying what's the difference, what's the distinction, and this isn't even my research. This is research done by other groups who carefully study soldiers coming back, found the number one predictor was purpose. Can I repurpose my life after this? If I can't, then I'm going to suffer. But if I can, and I can find purpose and meaning from this, some connection to something bigger than myself, that's what we might call meaning in our life, where we feel like our life has some reason there. There's something that's important for me. The reason I'm here is important. Those people end up doing well. And you could say that Holocaust survivors who come out and have that sense of purpose and meaning are much more likely to not just survive, but thrive.
Yeah. Vic Strecher, it's just an honor to sit this hour with you, to hear your story. And I just can't express my gratitude to you enough for not only this generosity on your part, but also the gift that I think you're giving so many people, because now we're at a point where people can not only read your book, but they can listen to your book, which I did both, and they can hear your stories. and
Thanks.
have this shared wisdom also, hopefully, through podcasts like this as well. So I want to
We
remind.
also have.
Sorry, go ahead,
Oh,
please. Oh,
yeah,
and your
if you don't
podcast,
mind.
yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, we also we built an application called Purposeful,
Right.
and Purposeful really does help people. We've found that we can help people find a statement of their purpose. We can help people live more intentionally. And as a result, what we have seen over 90 days are significant reductions in depression, significant reductions in anxiety, improvements in energy. And so that's one intention that I have, to try to reach as many people as possible. If people are AARP members, Purposeful is now being offered for free for a year
Fantastic.
for AARP members. I just want to mention that because books are helpful for people, and various podcasts. This one sounds like I can't wait to listen to more of your podcasts, Ron. By the way,
you.
I love how you answered these questions or ask these questions. It's great. But yeah, Purposeful has helped a lot of people, and I hope to help more people with it.
Thank you. And I'll hold up the book again. It's called Life on Purpose. It's published by Harper One. The subtitle is How Living for What Matters Most Changes Everything by Victor J. Strecher. So I'll hold that book up so people see it, and maybe we can post a static image of it as well. Thank you very, very much. My best wishes to you and to your family.
Ron, thank you so much for inviting me, and I wish you the best, and best wishes to all the listeners.
Thank you.
Take care.
This season is produced and edited by Jonah Lee Paz. Content editing by Bronwyn Lee Paz. Digital marketing by Notebook Media. The Meaning Mindset is hosted by Rabbi Ron Lee Paz. Find us wherever you find your podcasts.